There is the satellite shot of the storm, and a historic storm. I have never seen a storm like this with my eyes because this is the strongest storm that's happened in my lifetime.
And again, we're not trying to frighten people, but this is one that we are, quite frankly, very frightened of.
We calculate the distance from the eye to downtown New Orleans right now is 135 miles.
If you live in Gulfport, Pascagoula, if you live in Biloxi, you need to be scared to death.
Okay, it's going to be going, basically, it's going to take a turn toward the northwest and then toward the north overnight.
You can see behind me here, right now at least, the water is not too far off.
This one is huge, and it's going to cause some serious problems.
Now, the next 24 hours are very critical in terms of the path.
That is simply unbelievable. As classic as it gets, there has been no sign of any weakening. Here's the computer model output. You can see it puts it right on top of New Orleans, and looking right up on that official National Hurricane Center track. And again, we stress statewide, we have the chance of isolated tornadoes and those spiral winds and very heavy rain. Now in 1969, and the pressure right now is 904 millimeters. So in a matter of minutes, there's a recount
You know how when drug companies tell you that if you take a medicine, you could have these side effects? Well, you don't think that means you.
I came to Hurricane Center in 1972, and so in 2005, in the 33 years, I learned a few things about hurricanes in that period of time. Central Louisiana with that GPS data. My name is Max Mayfield. I worked at the National Hurricane Center for nearly 35 years. I was the director there from 2000 to 2007. I applied for a job with the National Weather Service, and I really wanted to come to the Hurricane Center. Applied at the regional office in Fort Worth, Texas. They were very nice, said have a seat. We'll be right within a few years. Everybody wanted to go to Miami or New Orleans back then, so I did what a lot of people do. I enrolled in grad school. That first day of class, I had a call from the National Weather Service, and they offered me a job at the Hurricane Center. And I said, I'll be there tomorrow if you need me. I moved in and moved out the same day into this apartment.
It was meteorology or astronomy. Those were my two interests growing up. And I think at some point I decided that the job prospects were better in meteorology. My name is James Franklin. I'm the former branch chief of the Hurricane Specialist Unit at the National Hurricane Center. The job that I was hired to involved flying into hurricanes on the NOAA P-3 aircraft. One of the things that we were doing in the 1980s was taking these very primitive instruments, these dropwind-sondes, and we were able to show that they made the models of the day more accurate in terms of track, dropping these instruments in the environment of storms, and then learning something more fundamental about hurricanes' work with the various observations that we had on the P-3 Doppler radar, the step-frequency microwave radiometer, the dropwind-sondes, all look at different pieces of a storm and help us understand the structure better and try and understand how they're going to behave more accurately.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank all of you for joining us at this hearing to discuss and examine the impact of severe weather on our communities and what the citizens and government can do to lessen its impact.
The season leading into Katrina was predated by a very active hurricane season in 2004. So I think people going into the 2005 hurricane season were aware about how destructive hurricanes could be.
A Category 5 storm, the worst case scenario, would put over 28 feet of water in some inland areas of Plaquemines Parish and over 23 feet of water in New Orleans. And it's really not a question of if, it's a question of when.
The hurricane season took off really quickly, and we had big storms early on. We had Hurricane Cindy that struck South Louisiana, followed up by Dennis, which was a Category 3 destructive hurricane. And then later down the road in late August came Hurricane Katrina.
It's almost a good thing if you have something develop in the eastern or central Atlantic. It becomes powerful out there. It gets people's attention and you have time to, watch it. This one didn't do that.
It was a little surprising. I was working that day and it hit in the evening, thinking through most of the day, you know what, this isn't really going to be a big problem at home. We didn't put our shutters up.
Most of the major hurricanes in the Atlantic form from tropical waves that move off the coast of Africa. They move off every 3 or 4 days, just like clockwork. And Katrina was related to that, but it was not very impressive looking. I mean, you could barely track it as it came across the Atlantic. It didn't really become a tropical depression until the 23rd of August in the southeastern Bahamas. And then it became a tropical storm on the 24th of the central Bahamas. We were forecasting it to become a Category 1 hurricane, which it did just as it made landfall on the southeast Florida coast. And I remember the outcry from a lot of people here in South Florida saying we didn't have any warning, or we didn't have enough warning. Or what they really meant was it didn't form out well out in the Atlantic, and we didn't talk about it for days and days.
The most striking part about Hurricane Katrina was its rapid intensification in the Gulf of Mexico.
The conditions for it to strengthen in the Gulf of Mexico were just absolutely ideal.
Took advantage of the warmest at the time, some of the warmest temperatures we had recorded in the Gulf of Mexico.
Everything we were looking at suggested it was extremely favorable to intensify.
And then towards the northern Gulf of Mexico, and the swath that we have is shifted a little bit farther along towards the west now, so we have brought in the eastern part of Louisiana. Let's take a look at that swath for you right now, and you can see that movement again towards the northwest and towards the north. So now we're including the Florida Panhandle, southern parts of Alabama and Mississippi, and eastern Louisiana. That's because we've continued to see that westward movement. So
I think the tracks initially were a little too far to the right, and it ended up moving left early on.
The Hurricane Center really doesn't like to make major changes unless they're absolutely sure. We call that the windshield wiper effect. If we flip-flop back and forth, we lose all credibility. There was one period of time there on that Friday before landfall on Monday morning, the models really shifted significantly to the west, and we jumped the track more than we normally do, but fortunately it was the right thing to do, and we stayed locked in on that.
One of the things that we were seeing on that last evening shift before it came was that there were some indications that Katrina was weakening a little bit, and that this outer eye wall was forming.
During these eye wall replacement cycles, you have effectively 2 rings of severe storms that encircle the eye. The larger ring takes over. The inner eye wall dissipates, the outer eye wall takes over, the hurricane is big. And that's what happened with Katrina.
I do remember writing in the discussion about how that's not necessarily good news, because while the peak winds come down, their breadth expands, which means more people experience hurricane conditions, more people experience major hurricane conditions, and it also means there's more breadth of a wind field to increase storm surge.
It might be a little weaker than it was, but it's bigger, and bigger storms can be bigger problems at the coast.
Well, and as you can see, it's moving toward the west-northwest, but it's expected to turn more towards the north with time, and it has increased in forward speed, now moving at 12.
I learned a long time ago that it's not all about the forecast. In fact, if you make a perfect forecast, if you don't communicate that effectively to the right people, it's all for nothing.
The coordination part of hurricane response is crucial to making sure that you're getting ahead of the game.
The Hurricane Center has a hurricane liaison team where they partner with FEMA.
They're basically connecting the 2 pieces. And so they're talking well in advance of a hurricane actually hitting, because there are decisions that have to be made days in advance.
The way I saw our job at the Hurricane Center, it would be to give the forecast and the uncertainty in that forecast, talk about all the different hazards associated with the forecast, and then get out of the way and let the emergency managers do their emergency management talk.
Time is your most precious commodity in any disaster. And so it's important that the meteorologists and the emergency managers are working hand in glove.
The leader of the hurricane liaison team at the Hurricane Center His name is Matthew Green. Matthew grew up in New Orleans. His mother still lived in New Orleans. Well, at the time, New Orleans had a voluntary evacuation order. I'm hearing from him and from others that people were really not responding, especially in the New Orleans area.
I was conducting briefings with officials in Florida about Katrina at the time that it was threatening the coast. I remember just that sinking feeling that very rarely you feel as a meteorologist. You feel the feeling of this could be a bad hurricane, or this could be a bad severe weather episode. But in certain instances, like with Katrina, it goes far beyond that.
But Matthew couldn't convince his own mother to leave New Orleans. She was in the evacuation zone. That was it. I knew we had to do something.
Max Mayfield called me before the storm came in on Monday morning and said, "Governor, I hate to tell you this, but it looks like this storm is going to be really a terrible storm, and it looks like it's going to come in right on Mississippi."
Governor Haley Barbour in Mississippi, I told him, Katrina is very, very powerful. It's going to be worse than Camille.
We talked a little bit more, and then he asked me, "What can I do to help you?" And I said, "The best thing you could do for me is to get the news media to start saying that this storm is going to be worse than Camille."
We're sitting in the newsroom looking at the little teletype printout of this like, oh, wow. It was a National Weather Service bulletin. It essentially said, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." I mean, just the most dire thing you've ever seen from the National Weather Service.
It was hard not to compare this event to what I went through in 1969. My name is Robert Ricks. I'm a retired lead forecaster from the National Weather Service office in Slidell, Louisiana. I issued the warning the day before landfall, before Katrina in 2005.
I'm at my desk and I get a call, and it's Governor Haley Barbour, which you could reach Governor Barbour on the phone, but it was kind of unusual for him to call me on my cell phone, and his concern was people were not taking it seriously enough.
Marcia actually went down to the coast more than once before the storm came in to try to get people to evacuate.
People talk about, at the time, we were going through hurricane fatigue, as they call it. I'm Jeff Pender. I'm a politics and government editor at Mississippi Today. 20 years ago, I was politics and investigations editor at the Sun Herald based in Biloxi. Was working there when Hurricane Katrina hit. There had been two, I guess you would call near misses or near hits, whatever you want to call them. Before then, a lot of people had evacuated, and evacuating costs money. It takes time. It disrupts things. People were tired of doing that.
We were afraid we were going to have a whole lot of people who weren't going to evacuate.
He asked me if he thought we would attend a press conference of maybe him and Mayor Holloway and whomever else. They just wanted to get the word out that this was one you should evacuate for if you all can.
Every chance I got with networks or any Mississippi station, I would say this is going to be worse than Camille.
It did make a big difference in our evacuation. Lots and lots of people who weren't thinking about evacuating because of hurricane fatigue did after Max Mayfield said what he said and got the news media to start parroting it. People in Mississippi know what Camille was and what it meant and how bad it was.
Robert Ricks is one of the heroes. He'd been saying potential for loss of life, and he needed to take action, and he'd advise your local officials. And it really describes the suffering that could occur if you did not heed the advice.
You got to compare it to something, but to put it in perspective, and how you do that, that's a tough nut to crack, because once again, as soon as you do that, well, I survived that one. I didn't, and it's tough. It's a tough messaging problem.
Some emergency managers say they think that Camille may have killed more people in 2005 than it did in 1969 because people who had been in Mississippi, for example, that had been through Camille and survived, thought, hey, this is just another Category 5 hurricane, and they thought they could survive Katrina, and they were much, much different.
Camille hit at night. And so you heard noises, but you couldn't tell what was really going on. It was a scary experience. And then the devastation, in my lifetime, I had never seen the devastation like Camille brought in. But we didn't think there could be anything worse than that.
There's kind of always been a hurricane culture on the Mississippi coast. Hurricane Camille made such a huge impact on people's lives that it was still talked about. Restaurants would still have high water marks marked on their walls. This was the Camille high water mark.
Our neighbor across the street was an elderly lady, and she said that she had ridden out Camille in her home and had not had any problems. So we felt confident that it wasn't going to be as bad as Camille, that we could stay.
When a storm was coming in and people were making decisions on where they were going to ride it out or whether to evacuate, always a major consideration was, we're going to stay in our house, you can come stay with us. It was fine during Camille. That was just the benchmark. That's how it was viewed. Benchmarks get broken and blown away, as we found out.
You know, they tell you to take pictures of your belongings before a storm hits in case you have to file for insurance.
Here we sit, watching a hummingbird on the hummingbird feeder. The winds are starting to pick up just a little bit, not much.
So we already had all the video equipment out. Why not just go around the house and video? And so we did that.
This is 4 o'clock on Sunday evening, and they're expecting a hurricane to hit first thing in the morning. Want to take a picture before it hits so we know where everything's at. All right, this is the front of the yard. Don't get me in it.
The public is very familiar with our Saffir-Simpson scale. It's the category scale that we use to sort of rate the intensity or strength of a storm. Category 1, Category 2, Cat 5, and so forth. But here are the problems with the Saffir-Simpson scale. First, it's only a wind scale. It does not capture the other hazards associated with hurricanes like rainfall, tornadoes, and storm surge. And what we know is that the deadliest aspect of a hurricane is water, always has been. But the Saffir-Simpson scale is a wind scale.
It does a nice job of explaining what are the peak winds that somebody might get from this storm. Does that well. Obviously, it doesn't do anything about surge, doesn't do anything about rainfall, inland flooding, doesn't do anything about tornadoes, and there are all these other hazards. This was within 12 to 15 hours of landfall. Not a Category 5 anymore. We think it's going to weaken, but that doesn't mean that the impacts are going to be any less. In fact, it could mean that the impacts are going to be more.
By that time, the surge had built up to the Category 5 intensity surge, and that was not going away. The winds backed off to Cat 3 at landfall, but that surge was still hanging up there at Cat 5. Now all the messaging fell out based on that motivation that we were dealing with a Category 5 surge.
By that point in the process, hopefully everybody's preparations were already done because it was really too late to respond to that kind of a change.
We thought we were the most prepared people on the earth. We went out, we got sandbags, we got extra food, we got cash out of the bank, we got gas in gas cans, we had a generator. We thought we had everything we needed.
I was 4 years old when Camille hit. I remember a few things about Camille, but I mean, you don't remember much other than I can remember smells and my dad carrying us to the wind and stuff. We just would get your snacks and your water, different things that you need that everybody tell you to get, and you would just prepare to hunker down and be done with it. My name is Lisa Parker, born and raised here in Waveland, Bay St. Louis area. At the time of Katrina, I was the chief secretary, and I'd been with the police department for 11 years. My experience prior to this was it's kind of like a slumber party. Everybody would get stuck at the PD. You would bring food, everybody bring water, whatever you needed, your clothes, and you stay the night, hunker through the winds and the rain, and then nothing major would really happen. And you go home the next day and, it was over with.
This was going to be a different type storm. Tidal surge was going to be a monster. Pressure dropped to 902 millibars at one point.
It's a very large storm. Camille was a very small storm, and this one is huge, and it's going to cause some serious problems as it moves on in. This is the timeline here. We think this
was going to be a monster storm.
Hurricane Katrina produced a massive storm surge, and I've often felt that it's one of the more underreported stories of Hurricane Katrina. We saw record storm surge height and expansive reach of that storm surge well to the east of the dirty side of the eye of the storm. What is the dirty side? Well, that's the side of the storm where you have both the motion of the storm plus the rotational speed of the winds around the center. And so places like Mobile, Alabama, and Gulfport and Biloxi, Mississippi were very much in the dirty side of the eye, so experienced the brunt of the wind as well as the storm surge.
If you're in a swimming pool, standing arm's width away from the side of the pool, if you push your hand like that, that's going to push some of that pool water into the side of the pool. It's going to elevate that water. It's going to go up a little bit. But if you take your arm and sweep that up against the pool, you're going to have a lot more water over a lot larger area, and it's going to be even higher. So when you have a large, powerful hurricane, you're going to have an extremely high storm surge.
I do remember one of the guys in Max's office saying that a buoy out in the Gulf had measured the wave height. Storm surge was 37 feet if you include the waves on top.
You can see here's Biloxi here, down here near past Christiane. That's where they got one of the highest surge areas of all, Waveland as well.
When a storm's coming, we always evacuate south of the tracks. I'm Michael Prendergrass, and at the time of Hurricane Katrina, I was the assistant police chief at the time. When Katrina got in the Gulf and then it, started coming this way, then we started meeting more often at the EOC. It was the mayors, all your supervisors, FEMA and MEMA.
All Hancock counties on the evacuation orders. So the guys would go out and talk to residents who wanted to stay and say, look, this is going to be a bad storm. You pretty much write your social security number on your arm in marker, so we'll be able to find you when the storm's over with. So we knew that it was serious, and we knew that these people, if they wasn't leaving, they were going to be in a lot of trouble.
I hate to show my ignorance because I should have known better, but when they were talking about the surge, it was like, well, that will be on the coast. Where we lived was called Bayou View for a reason. There was a bayou, and we were close to the bayou, and the bayou feeds to the Gulf, and that's where the problem was.
We've had a crew in Biloxi, Mississippi. One of our producers, Simon Temperton, talked to us on the phone as the worst of the hurricane was ripping through Biloxi.
We're going through some unbelievable conditions right now. We're actually in the Armed Forces Retirement Home here in Gulfport, and we're standing inside, and water has been seeping into the building. I'd say we had like a 20-foot at least, that much storm surge outside. It's washed all our vehicles away, our rental cars and everything else.
This is the view from our front yard, our front lake.
I mentioned to Jerry, I say, the water's not draining into the bayou. And he says, the bayou's even with the street.
I was in my office sleeping, and then I had some of my staff coming in and said, hey, there's water starting to come in the PD. So I got up. We started picking up like the computers and everything, the hard drives and stuff that was set on the floor, and start putting them on the desk.
We started putting things up in case a little bit of water came in.
And the water is lapping at our door, literally lapping at our door. Trying to float in the house. Up on the furniture. I don't know how much of this stuff we'll be able to hold on to.
I put my vacuum cleaner on the sofa. And then, as the water's getting deeper and deeper, I started thinking, well, maybe I should put some things in the attic.
We boarded up at the PD. We had these custom-made covers that we would board up to keep the glass from blowing in and stuff. It was kind of hard to see out of the PD, but was able to open up the door a little bit to look, and you could tell that the water was starting to come up, and then next thing you know, you looked out there, and it was like 4 feet. And I'm like, oh, this is not good.
The force of water moving at 3 miles or 5 miles per hour has the same destructive force as a Category 3 hurricane. Water isn't something that you can easily outrun either. Even for water that's moving in at 3, 4, 5 miles per hour, that's a very fast clip. It's not something that you can outswim. It's not something you can outrun.
We are totally flooded. This is the bedroom. The bed is floating away, all the pillows, the cedar chest, everything floating away. I'm gonna walk over here to the windows, and you can actually see the water lapping at the windows. I can't go outside anymore to take video, but if you can see out there, it is like we're in the middle of a river. We are totally surrounded by water. We've lost everything. We've pulled down the attic stairs. There's not much room up there.
We knew the water was rising fast. Our PD was located with a big ravine on the side. So in your mind, too, you're thinking, oh, it's the ravine, you know, taking all this water in. It's just overflowing.
You can hear the water hitting and the water coming in. And some of the patrol cars, that all the staff that parked behind the PD, where those patrol cars washed up and blocked the back door. At that time, you know, I'm like, well, I got with my captain and stuff, and I'm like, let's get everybody in the attic. You know, said, Mike, I'm not getting in the attic. I'm not drowning in this PD.
The chief then decided that we needed to get out the building. He said it was time for us to get out. There was 27 of us. And we were all in the hallway, and we decided to say the All Father, and we all prayed, and we said we're gonna do this.
So we're gonna have to like start trying to bust out the front window of this place. So that's what we did. We wound up getting some chairs and just started wailing on these windows, and finally we was able to get a window busted, and we was able to start beating on that board. And then once we got the board off, we had the water started coming, you know, gushing in.
When the board came off the door, that suction came in, and it swooped in, and like 3 or 4 of them went underwater, and a couple of our dispatcher females got sucked into the courtroom, which was next door.
Once we, you know, got everybody gathered up and everybody accounted for it, and we started easing out the PD through that window. Someone out to the highway where we had these bushes, got them on that. Some stayed up against the PD and kind of went up with the tide.
We kept thinking, well, the highway's higher because the way the PD was built, it was like in a gully, like you go off the highway and go down, and that's where the PD was. So we thought maybe we get to the, you know, like in the median in the front of the PD. I just made sure I had a life jacket because I couldn't swim.
You think it's going to be the people that are sitting right on the water. You just don't think it's going to be you. I'd never been in the attic for my life. There wasn't much room up there. You really think it's going to stop. And then you do some really squirrely things like your brain's not really working good. And I had Blockbuster videos. You know, those you used to have to take them back or you get a fee. So I made sure to get my Blockbuster videos and bring them up with me. And Jerry got his cigars and his bottle of scotch. We took a cooler and some ham and some stuff like that, some drinks.
For family medical reasons, I was living in Hattiesburg at the time. I actually had quite a few people staying at my house from the Sun Herald, thinking it would be high and dry and safe in Hattiesburg. We did at that time have an online presence, so that was new, and we did a lot of stuff through there. Our plan was we would help run the blog, assuming we could keep power longer than than folks on the coast and keep the blog going. And the blog was allowing people to chime in like, hey, and it was, honest to God, it was horrible and gut-wrenching. We were getting messages like, I'm in DeLille and we're flooding and I'm trapped in my attic and I can't get out. I mean, horrible stuff like that. I'm afraid we're going to die.
Even when we got in the attic, and how you got the little hole for your attic door, and we were kind of sitting there with our feet hanging over, you keep thinking it's going to stop.
It's weird because when I left that building and made it to the bush where we ended up, but I don't remember going that far. And when I hit those sandbags when we were walking, because you don't see anything, you're just dredging your feet, I thought it was a body because it's soft and it felt like a body down there. And I think that kind of freaked me out, and I didn't remember getting to the tree.
I was on the trees by the highway. We had a dispatcher that was she was panicked, and I get it. And she was like in the middle of the parking lot. We had a big dually truck that had floated there. And she was like there. And she was a short lady, so I swam to her and was holding her and just trying to chill her out, telling her that there's going to be an eye that's going to come in. When the eye comes, it's going to be calm, and we're going to get off this truck and we're going to get you up on the PD. Well, never did have an eye.
It's like whitecaps in the parking lot of the PD. You're seeing this water come in while you're hanging in this tree, and you can see, next thing you know, is part of a building passing you by. You see boats floating by. I mean, big boats, not just little boats. You can see these huge boats. Then you'll see your car floating by.
I don't think it was until the water got about an inch from the ceiling that it dawned on me, if this water comes in this attic, we're trapped. We don't have a way out. And then I felt, that was the first time I felt a sense of like, oh my goodness, a sense of panic. And so I told Jerry there was one of those little vents, in the attic. And I told him we need to punch that out in case we need to crawl out.
You think you're there, but you're not thinking, oh my goodness, what's happening at my house? What's happening to the people down the street? Because you're just so concentrated on your part of what you're doing and while you're trying to survive. You didn't think about anything else.
I remember hearing all the sounds, and that's the scary thing. You hear
we can actually hear waves lapping against the window in the bathroom.
And I remember saying over and over again, if the structure will just hold, we can wait this out.
Okay, the water's going down.
Because we could gauge it by looking down at the ceiling, and there was a little piece of metal that was part of the attic door, and it stopped. And then pretty soon, very slowly, it started going down. And then it's like, like you're almost in a wreck, and you survive it. You go, oh, I found a place up in that attic to lay down for a minute because the adrenaline just kind of drained. And that was just a matter of waiting it out.
You felt like he was in like a slow motion type thing. But from what I gathered, we were in the bush at least probably 6 hours, something like that. And the only reason we got out was because the water started receding.
The water was so filthy. And there was one point when it was rising, when it hit the toilet level and the sewer started backing up, the toilet looked like a geyser. It just had sewage just pumping out of it. So you knew it was filthy. That was one of our decisions why we stayed in the attic a little longer, because we didn't want to climb out when our face would have to be in water. So we waited until it was about chest high so we could actually walk out.
Climb out.
Yeah.
Because you had to step over everything, Everything was on the floor or roof or someplace where it wasn't supposed to be.
It's funny because you can tell your good furniture from your bad furniture, because your good furniture floats. You had to push the TV out of the way, and then when we got to the front door, push branches and stuff out of the way, and all our neighbors started coming out. And this one lady says, because it was, it was in August, she said, I just bought some back-to-school clothes, and they were in my car, and so if y'all see them, they're still in the bag. And we're looking at her like, I don't think we're going to find your back-to-school clothes, lady. We might not find your car. And but you're not thinking straight. You're not thinking straight.
One of our investigators was married to the assistant chief in Bay St. Louis, and he knew we were supposed to be at this hotel at the highway. So him and another guy from the city of Bay St. Louis went and got a school bus. We all got in, and we decided we're going to go to the hospital or to the EOC in Bay St. Louis. Well, the eeriest part is when we turned around on the highway and started going toward Bay St. Louis, you could hear a pin. I mean, it was silent. Everybody's just on the bus, and you're just like, wow. You know, it was kind of like you were in a daze. Then we'd pull up, and there was these people coming out of these buildings on the highway, and they're like, get on the bus. We're going so-and-so. We don't know where we're going, but get on the bus. And it was kind of like apocalypse or something. You know, these people were like zombies, and everybody was in shock.
My main concern when we first climbed out, I told my son I want to go see my mom in Long Beach. And he said, I don't know if we can get there. And I said, well, let's try. Well, there was no way to get to Long Beach. And that's when it dawns on you that, you know, there's no way to get anywhere.
Look, you know what opened up my eyes is when it was over with and going looking at the structure that it did on our beach. Me and the chief at the time went to the south of the tracks. I mean, it looked like an atomic bomb hit. I mean, there was nothing.
Look at the highways.
Is that State Drive?
It does look like a war zone, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I've heard people say that over and over again, and that's the honest to goodness truth. It looks like a war zone.
They wouldn't let us fly on Monday. So I cut a deal with people in Washington that Tuesday morning, if the National Guard had cleaned off the runway, which I was pretty sure they had, then they would let my state plane fly the coast.
They were going to be making a first flight in on helicopters with the governor, MEMA, Guard folks, and that they would make a place for me and some other media. If I could get to Jackson and get to Guard Air Base, it took 3.5 hours with lots of stops and helping people pull tree limbs out of the way and stuff like that. It took forever to get down there. I made it in time to get on that flight.
I asked Marcia, did she want to ride in the helicopter? And she said no, she's already done it, and she didn't want to do it again. She didn't want to see it again.
It was too devastating.
I had been unable to reach a photographer or anything at the Sun Herald, so it was just me, and I had a point-and-shoot camera.
We flew from Gulfport Biloxi Airport all the way to the Pearl River, then all the way to Pascagoula.
They let me ride in a old Huey with the governor and General Cross. That flight and what I saw, it was traumatic. Your mind can't process that kind of damage. I'm trying to figure out where I am. I'm like looking at stuff, and I can't place where I am. I remember I see all this stuff in the water, and I'm thinking, well, I thought we were coming near to Bay St. Louis, but I can't. I realize it's the Bay Bridges out.
What you're looking at there is the Bay St. Louis Bridge. There's no bridge there. Look carefully.
Right.
What you're seeing are simply the pilings.
Pilings.
The entire bridge is gone.
Debris in the water. You see just total obliteration.
I've often said it looked like the hand of God had wiped away the coast, like an atomic weapon had gone off out in the Sound.
I'd been through a couple of more minor hurricanes, but it's hard to wrap your mind around this. Bay St. Louis gone. The Iberville, south of the interstate, gone. I mean, I was looking down when we flew over to Iberville and seeing all these, I'm like, what is that? And then it dawned on me, it was lumber from houses that had blown up. Honestly, I feared a lot of people I worked with were dead. There's no other way to put it. This looks uninhabitable, like the Bulletin warned. It was horrible.
President Bush has been in Mobile, Alabama for about the last 10 or 15 minutes to get a first-hand look at what the hurricane did and what the government is doing to help. Earlier today, he said what has been done so far is unacceptable. He's in a hangar in Mobile right now, and let's see if we can listen in to what he's being told.
One thing I will never forget from essentially we landed, the head of FEMA, the famous Good Job Brownie.
I remember seeing him with Bush over in Mobile. Bush asked me, how were the people doing, the government, federal government people? And I said, they're working hard and they're doing their best. And he turns around and said,
and Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. The FEMA director's working 24 hours. They're working 24 hours a day.
And he got roundly criticized for saying, good going, Brownie.
I was within earshot when he and Haley shook hands, and I remember the director saying, don't worry, Haley, we've got this. We've got lots of experience. And I just remember Governor Barber looking at him and saying, I'm not sure you totally understand. He said, we just went from one end to the other, and he said, it's annihilated. It looks like Hiroshima. That has always stuck in my head, that first interaction between the governor and the head of FEMA.
Starting in 1970, every year, the state government did a hurricane preparation and planning, practicing, dealing with the federal government. The problem was we had a great operation. We just were prepared for the wrong hurricane.
They had actually staged a lot of the first response and National Guard stuff in Hattiesburg, thinking that would be safe. Boom, you hit the road, get down to the coast. Well, that, they were literally had to dig out of Hattiesburg and dig through the roadways to even get down there.
It was a bad mess. And if it hadn't been for the military, well, we'd have had a whole lot worse situation down there.
The military and also the electric company, they were like the cavalry when they came in. They came with power saws and equipment, tons of men. Logistically, they were staged in a better place than FEMA.
I remember early on, people needed info about where they could get ice, water, medical help. I mentioned Don Hammock was running the blog from the coast. He and I both. It became a sounding board for people to check in and say, hey, we're okay, or hey, we haven't heard from Aunt Edna, who lives wherever on the point. Does anyone know? And
all of our people lived on the coast, and we didn't know where they were. That's your biggest fear, is you don't go to discover from Mobile to New Orleans. You go to, where are my people, and is everybody okay? That's your first thought. That's all you can think about. You find out that your people are okay, and then you want to go back to your house. I don't even know why you go back. I guess you go back thinking you'll find something you can use, but there's really nothing that you can use.
We lost everything. We lost all our patrol cars. We lost everything.
There was no police cars. There was no equipment. There was no houses. There was no place to use a restroom. I mean, it was crazy.
One of the things that gave me hope and confidence was at 8 o'clock that night, all 26 Waveland police officers were on duty. There was not a habitable structure in Waveland, yet they were all on duty. And that gave me a lot of confidence.
Within 3 days, we had like Polk County, Kentucky, and these different agencies and the church groups that got here, got us back on our feet, donated us patrol cars, brought us dry clothes, food, everything.
They like, guys, take a break. We got this. And some of the guys that go out on patrol with them and stuff, but it was awesome. I mean, these other departments was our lifeline.
One of the big things that was missing with Katrina is that we were addressing the needs of those people who largely evacuated. And we didn't consider the people who were left behind, the people who couldn't get out. What do you do with those people?
I remember when President Bush would come, it would be great for morale, but it would take up my time for going to be with the people that I knew needed water or ice. People needed food that were starving. I remember when I would come back to the mansion, we got all the frozen meats and everything I could, and we took it, and I went on the helicopter and took it to Waveland, of course, out further west where they had nothing.
We stayed with family and we borrowed clothes from family. The only thing that saved us were the people that came from other parts of the country, because it didn't take them long to get here. I cannot remember being impressed with either the state or the federal response. I was very impressed with the Christian response. People came, we became really good friends with them, and they came back more than once.
One of the great lessons of Katrina is a lesson we already should know. Americans are the most generous people in the world. They're not just generous with their money, they're generous with their time.
The amount of volunteers who came in from four corners of the earth to help, all of that was inspiring. That wasn't a flash in the pan. People kept coming back. People kept helping. The governor and others, our congressional delegation, being able to secure some of the recovery packages they did made it possible for that desire to stay and rebuild to happen.
Senator Cochran flew to the coast, and then he came back to the governor's mansion to meet with me. By God's grace, he was the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. I'll never forget, he said to me, "You're going to know more about this, what needs to be done, than anybody in Washington ever will, because you're down here in the middle of it. I'm going to look to you, and you tell me what you need, and I'll try to get it for you. Here's the plan: housing, jobs, education."
To address our biggest issue, housing, we'll use $4 billion of community development block grants to rebuild houses which were destroyed by the storm surge, therefore weren't covered by regular insurance. Other CDBG funds were used for water and sewer expansion, and that we anticipate many people on our coast will choose to move inland to get away from the storms, and we have to expand the infrastructure.
I went up to Washington on November the 1st to have a meeting with the president and present our plan. And then I went over to give the plan to the Speaker of the House. Well, I went in the House side of the Capitol, and I got right to the elevator, and I heard somebody say, Haley. And I looked over, and it's Barney Frank, maybe the most liberal guy in the House of Representatives. He said, I heard Mississippi's got a plan of what y'all think the government ought to do. If you'll give me a copy of your plan, I will take it, and I will send a copy to every Democratic member of the House. And I will tell them in my letter, this is Mississippi's plan. I'm voting for it, and I hope you will too. We didn't lose a Democrat vote.
That $25 billion package we got from Congress, saved. Honest to goodness, it saved the entire state's economy.
I believe Katrina and Mississippi's response to Katrina has done more to help Mississippi's image than anything else in my lifetime.
The center, people brought in water, ice, and then they started bringing in clothes, boxes and boxes and boxes of clothes.
In the case of Hurricane Katrina, everyone is exposed to the storm, but certain populations and communities have greater sensitivity. That sensitivity is linked to things like socioeconomic factors, race, age, and access to medical facilities, power, and so forth. And then the third factor is adaptive capacity. You're exposed to the hurricane, you're sensitive to it. How do you respond or bounce back from the event? And many of those same factors that define sensitivity also define adaptive capacity.
It's weird. I'll go through some areas and it'll be disheartening. It's like, oh, that never came back. Look, there's still a vacant lot there. Communities like East Biloxi and the Point, the historic communities, started as fishing villages way, way back, that they're gone. People could not afford to come back.
Like if I go down and decide to ride down the beach, I still see that, you see that empty lot. You're coming around, you see that empty lot. I still see the house that was there before there. You might see that, just that staircase there, but I remember when the stairs went up to this house, wherever it is in my neighborhood that was there.
Katrina, again, like anything else, the standard metrics no longer applied. How do you calculate a loss to a community that, like Waveland? Waveland was gone. I don't know that you can totally put a number on things like that. Cultural things on the coast that have been there forever, lost, never to come back. Little houses and, rich fishing history and big Vietnamese community. And so much of that is gone. Just people can't afford to have single family residences there. You see the numbers from Katrina, 238. I know that's argued a little bit, but 238 dead in Mississippi. I think nearly 1,400 dead total.
I think it was 23 people that refused to leave. And I'm not going to say that it was all 23, but 23 people drowned in the city of Waveland during Katrina.
I would have never dreamed that day there would only be 238 and that a third of them wouldn't be on the coast.
In Katrina, they went back and looked at the loss of life. They revised the number down. There's still uncertainty. There's always going to be uncertainty, but now they're saying that the combined loss of life, the direct and indirect loss of life in Katrina is around 1,400. Of those 1,400, 520 of them were direct deaths from the hazards of the hurricane. 565, even more, were from the indirect.
I had moved from the coast to Hattiesburg. One main reason being my late first wife at the time had some major health issues. She had family in Hattiesburg, and we'd moved there to be a little closer to them. And shortly before Katrina, she had been put on the heart transplant list at Ochsner. New Orleans got hit. We don't know what's going to happen with Ochsner's, heart transplant operation. The hospital went into triage mode. Heart transplantation got shut down for months. They were busy dealing with Katrina casualties. A lot of doctors left. Had to lost their houses, whatever. So we had every reason to believe she was going to get a heart transplant within 6 months. Katrina hit. Ochsner was shut down for a while. It took 22 months and, made everything more difficult. And she passed away about a month and a half after the transplant. I think at one point, it may have been a year or maybe even more than that out. The Sun Herald helped document. There were spikes in suicide. There were people who got sick or hurt in the debris long after that are probably not part of that count. So Katrina sucked.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the order for the quorum be rescinded.
There are a lot of things that we learned in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. I think one of the biggest takeaways for everyone was that before Katrina, we planned for disasters that were easy, not necessarily disasters that were real. In the wake of Hurricane Katrina, there was landmark legislation that passed, the Post-Katrina Emergency Reform Act, or PCIMRA. Rethought and re-envisioned how we respond to and recover from major catastrophic disasters in this country.
This is going to be a Herculean task to rebuild, and everything that we have, we're going to bring to bear
to help rebuild.
The federal government screwed some things up.
Why?
But they did a whole lot more right than wrong.
It took them a while, Haley.
Well, they did. Their logistics system failed.
One of the things that came out of PCIMRA was the requirement that the federal agencies put together catastrophic hurricane plans and consider all of the terrible things that could go wrong, not just for a hurricane, but for any hazard that might impact this country.
Katrina is 20 years old, and a lot has happened in 20 years. We start to improve our technology. People should begin to have greater confidence in the information coming from the National Hurricane Center or the National Weather Service.
You have a terrible disaster, but then people realize how important it is that we fund the research and the science that goes into making these forecasts better. Sort of on the other side of Katrina, we had a ton of money that just flowed into hurricane research, into hurricane science.
I've been in the field for over 40 years now and sort of getting funding for the various projects has always been a big problem.
The Hurricane Forecast Improvement Project has been really the guiding light of our hurricane improvement and research.
I think you can credit the 2004 storms and the 2005 storms for finally moving Congress to properly fund that.
We have made tremendous improvements in forecasting the intensity of hurricanes, and that's come with better data. It's come with better models that we didn't have 20 years ago.
The processes involved in intensification are more small scale. They're happening in the eye wall and in the cloud systems of hurricanes or in the water beneath the hurricane. In recent years, new satellite systems, new observing systems in the ocean, drones, aircraft have been able to provide more detailed information in these cloud systems or in the ocean that are starting to pay dividends in our understanding of the intensification process.
When I started as a forecaster the years prior to Katrina, we would never, ever forecast rapid intensification. Explicitly forecasting those huge jumps was just not something we had the confidence to do because we didn't have the tools. The models couldn't do it.
The nightmare scenario is that you have a storm that is kind of sort of developing, but the models don't really see it growing into a big, strong hurricane. And then overnight, it blows up, and then you have a Category 4 or 5 hurricane on your doorstep, and you have no time to get people out. You have no time to get the resources in. You have no time to respond or to do anything to save lives. That's a scenario that still happens today. Even with our best models, it can happen, but it's far less common than it was 20 years ago. The rapid intensification of the Hurricane Katrinas of 20 years ago would be seen today, by and large, with the information and the data that we have.
Now, the question may be, how does forecast enterprise like the National Hurricane Center or National Weather Service get this information? Many of these systems are NOAA systems. They're NOAA satellites or aircraft, but also NASA and other researchers provide data that are funneling into the weather models or into the observational suite that the forecasters at both the National Weather Service and the Hurricane Center have access to.
I think what a lot of people don't realize is that by and large, the data, the forecasts, the tools that we have for hurricanes, those are all publicly funded by taxpayer money. There aren't private companies, by and large, that are producing or gathering the data that we would need to make a more accurate forecast. That comes from the federal government.
The research enterprise benefits the forecast enterprise. Academic institutions like mine are conducting research on basic processes, theory, and even application. For example, there are colleagues here at the University of Georgia that have systems that sail through the ocean, if you will, underneath the ocean during hurricanes, collecting information that could be vital for hurricane diagnosis and forecasting.
These improvements that we've seen have come directly from the HFIP program that has been funded by taxpayer money. It's hard to, I think, disentangle what is research and what is used operationally for hurricane forecasts because they're kind of one and the same.
There was a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research that looked at these improvements that have occurred since 2007, and they found primarily due to improvements in intensity prediction, not so much track, but intensity, that the savings were about $5 billion per landfalling hurricane, just due to better forecasts over that 13-year period. The $5 billion of savings for every hurricane that hits, that's the annual budget of all weather forecasting. That from one hurricane. And so, you multiply that and you can see how much it's saving. When you have an accurate intensity forecast, you don't waste money preparing for something that doesn't happen, and you can allocate resources into the area much more effectively.
We have had some big-time hurricanes that have hit the U.S. over the past 8 years, but we didn't see the number of deaths that we saw in Katrina. The improvement in confidence in our ability to detect these things far out means that we're able to get people out, and people are listening. And because they trust the forecast, they're making these decisions sooner than they did 20 years ago.
We now have storm surge warning products. We see a narrowing of the forecast cone. These are things that provide progress. It also hopefully will spur less cry wolf or sort of normalcy and recency bias, and that people may become fatigued from warnings.
What they really invest a great deal of effort and time in is getting the social sciences community involved to better understand how to message things to make it more effective for public consumption.
It's important to think about hurricanes in terms of their impacts and not necessarily their categories or their benchmark in your mind. We have to erode this idea that it's just a storm of category this or just a tropical storm, and focus on the messaging and the impacts for each independent storm. Every hurricane is different.
That's ultimately the end game there, is get the message right and make people do proper response without being fearful. And it's going to be scary, true, but do what's right, and don't do it out of fear, but do it out of prudence.
It's kind of like in 2005, we were trying to look at the moon with a pair of binoculars, and then today we have a telescope. And so we see all the details on the surface of the moon, and you're like, oh, I didn't know this stuff was on the moon. But it's always been there, we just couldn't really see it. And that's kind of what's happening now with hurricane research. But there is some concern today about that funding that goes into all of this research that has gone into making our forecast better, having been cut or, eliminated in some cases.
It was really this year where the attacks on this progress that we'd been making really came into play.
As the Heritage Foundation's president, Dr. Kevin Roberts boldly and courageously states in the Mandate for Leadership, the next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI.
One of the things that got me interested in meteorology is hurricanes. Interestingly enough, I found something out very early on, even as a young child exploring scientists. There weren't many African American scientists in meteorology or any science for that matter. What inspired me is reading about Dr. George Washington Carver, who was a peanut scientist at Tuskegee. I read voraciously about him to understand the process of being a scientist because I didn't know any scientists. The American Meteorological Society keeps data on membership, and what we know is, as of some recent studies, about 2% of the American Meteorological Society membership is African American or Black. That number is even less for Hispanic and indigenous populations as well. I'm the first African American to receive a doctorate from Florida State's Meteorology Department, which is one of the oldest in the nation. I'm the second African American to be president of the American Meteorological Society. I don't enjoy being first and second in this. I'm not that old, so it's actually quite an indictment that I am the first or second in many of these capacities. As I attend the meetings and conferences, I see much more diverse faces than I did 20 or 30 years ago when I first got into this field, but there's still work to be done, and from a gender perspective as well. One of the things that we know that is very important for access into the STEM fields, for underrepresented communities is mentorship. People need to see scientists that look like them or have the same cultural marinades or experiences that they do. We have to broaden and change that narrative culturally, and I think this generation is starting to do that.
People need to understand the significance of what's happening right now. These are implications that are going to be felt for not years, decades.
It wasn't a surprise if you were looking at things like the Project 2025 document, which talked about NOAA and solely in terms of the climate change issue. So it was pretty clear that NOAA was going to suffer by association.
Climate change allegedly is everywhere. And if the American people elect a conservative president, his administration will have to eradicate climate change references from absolutely everywhere.
One of the things that we know as scientists, and it's not really debatable, is that climate is warming in the atmosphere and in the ocean. And much of that warming, in fact, over 90% of it is in the oceans.
The research has shown that the rapid intensification of hurricanes is a growing trend. It is a real trend. It's a trend that's primarily due to climate change and the warming of the waters.
In 2005, we ran out of names on the hurricane list. We went into the Greek alphabet. The concept of a hurricane season will certainly be around, but it may not have the same meaning 10 or 20 years from now.
This is no longer a hypothetical. The Trump administration is calling not for a cut to NOAA's research arm, but full elimination of it. If you eliminate NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, you're eliminating most of the tools in our arsenal to detect the strengthening of a hurricane, the rapid intensification of a hurricane, the track of a hurricane. The data that goes into the computer models comes from that research arm.
The National Weather Service itself, certainly the National Hurricane Center, doesn't do much in terms of research to improve forecasts. The rest of the community is what feeds that. There are 16 of these NOAA cooperative institutes, and they're academic institutions, but they get the majority of their funding from NOAA. 3 of them in particular that all deal with very important aspects of the hurricane problem. But without that NOAA funding, they're done.
Their hurricane hunters are directly supported by scientists from that research arm. The forecasters, the scientists who are taking the information from the airplanes, the data, and putting them into the model so the model can see what's happening inside the hurricane, those are funded by the research arm. So if you eliminate that, you're eliminating our ability to use and to have access to the only models that can routinely, regularly predict the rapid intensification of hurricanes.
All of the work in terms of rapid intensification and in terms of developing the storm surge warning that we now have, that didn't come out of people's spare time. That came because it was funded.
The reality of it is we need those models. It's not a nice to have.
So we're going to see, I think, some things around the edges even as early as this year. We have fewer weather balloons going up. We could have some degradations in forecasts and blown forecasts because of missed balloon launches. That's something we could see this year.
I have been watching the numbers, and the performance of the GFS in particular has not been as impressive as it has been in past years. I do find it interesting that the model that has been performing pretty decent over the past 8-10 years now is all of a sudden taking a slide backwards. They really rely, and they've been built in to look for balloon releases on a certain scale.
The new administration has come in through either layoffs and terminations of what they called probationary employees, which is just kind of a status thing. It has nothing to do with the performance of the individual employees, and compelled buyouts. We've seen those numbers come down pretty dramatically, where a lot of these offices are critically understaffed.
So about 1,000 years of experience walked out the door that day.
In the initial wave of probationary cuts was somebody at the modeling group up at the Environmental Modeling Center that was so accomplished he had algorithms in the code named for him. So, it was not just early career folks, which is bad enough, but you've got people who maybe just moved into new positions. They were recently promoted. We've lost a lot of experience.
Technological limitation no longer exists. So it begs one to say, do we need 177 field officers? I don't think so. It's based more or less on providing information, not so much directly to the public as it is to the emergency managers and the governor's offices and your stakeholders and whatnot. I don't see it as prohibitive or as bad to have the cuts as they are. It's very key that the Hurricane Center, the Storm Prediction Center, places like that, Ocean Prediction Center, they have to stay and do their job. Personally, I think it can be effectively and efficiently trimmed down a little bit and still not lose any service.
The National Weather Service local offices are the ones who take the big picture from the Hurricane Center and translate that into impacts on the local level. They're the folks who communicate with the local emergency managers. When they're short-staffed, they don't have the manpower to do the same level of communication with their local officials.
As someone who has a background in hurricane forecasting, science research, and emergency management, it's beyond what's happening to the Weather Service. It's also what they're talking about with FEMA, which is potentially even completely eliminating FEMA.
I would be reticent and not jump to any conclusions about getting rid of FEMA. FEMA is a big preparation, planning, cash register. And it does a pretty good job at that.
The reality of it is the states don't have the people, they don't have the resources, they don't have the money that they need to, in pretty much all cases, respond to a catastrophic hurricane like what we saw during Hurricane Katrina.
The federal government gave us $25.5 billion 20 years ago. The state budget today is $7 billion. I wasn't a math major. I can figure that out. The guys at FEMA that we dealt with, very, very seasoned, very knowledgeable, great attitude. I would hate to have been governor of Mississippi going to ask Congress for $25.5 billion without the FEMA people saying they need it.
What you'll end up doing is if you cut FEMA, you're going to effectively try to replicate FEMA across every state, which is one of the least efficient things you could possibly do. When the states are in trouble and they don't think they can handle a big catastrophic hurricane, they call up FEMA and they say, hey, what do you got? And FEMA's like, we got this. We'll move them. And they put them in place. And it's that simple. And do you really want to do that yourself?
The coast is clearly back bigger and better than it's ever been. The coast was back to its population in 3 years. New Orleans is not back to its population yet.
I just feel that the city's come a long ways. I think we're bigger and better now, and I think we learned a lot from Katrina.
Sometimes this far out, it can be easy to romanticize things. It was such a life-altering event for the entire state, but for people on the coast, it was something they're never going to forget.
Still today, during hurricane season, there's anxiety. I have anxiety during hurricane season. And when I lived down there, I had a lot of anxiety during hurricane season. And it just became too scary for me to live there.
We had a whole generation or two lulled into some sense of security of, hey, I can count on, if I'm here, I'm going to be safe. Katrina blew that away. A lot of people died. I hope we don't get to the point that because of Katrina being the high water mark, that doesn't repeat itself.
This is what I went through. I mean, I wouldn't stay. I wouldn't recommend anybody to stay. Look, if I wasn't in law enforcement, if I was retired, I wouldn't stay.
Hurricanes don't care about your political stripes. They don't care about your identity.
There's a very clear coordination of messaging between the National Hurricane Center and those local forecast offices.
Communicating these hazards as effectively as they've done in the past, it's going to be harder. You can tear something down in 5 months, but you can't
build it back up in 5 months, and you probably can't build it back up in 5 years. I think it is a generational loss.
The cost of the National Weather Service is about $4 to the average American annually. That's less than a gallon of milk. But the return on that investment is estimated at about 8,000%.
The bottom line is that for what the American taxpayer pays for NOAA and the National Weather Service, that's peanuts compared to the amount of money saved by accurate forecast. And anything done to diminish that forecast and the capability to communicate that forecast is not a good idea. And there'll be a price to pay.